online or in person? It's one of the questions that often comes up. How do we decide whether to hold a particular learning event in person or online? One of the reflections we need to start from is that in a context where short or even long-term travel is inherently costly in environmental, individual, and also social terms, it may be time to get used to considering physical presence as a valuable opportunity, one to be embraced provided we give it the necessary added value. So let's try to rephrase the question. When is it worth being physically present in the classroom? Or what makes it worthwhile to bring myself and all my students here for this specific activity? Physical presence still offers a number of substantial advantages. The first, and perhaps the most obvious, is that in some situations, physical presence is simply necessary to use objects, materials, equipment, or to physically explore buildings, spaces, or facilities. It's true that virtual reality exists, but we don't always have access to so-called digital twins, virtual replicas, of exactly what we need, and so physically going to those spaces may be necessary. Another topic that immediately comes to mind is the relationship with and between individuals, which in physical space unfolds through informal, casual, and incidental dimensions. These are certainly not impossible in online communication, but in face-to-face interactions, they take on more intense and engaging characteristics. However, there are other factors I'd like to draw your attention to. For example, the educational impact of space and the way it is managed. The physical layout of the university or school, the way the space is organized, furnished, and maintained, is in itself an important message that contributes to shaping the value-based background of the educational experience. Through spaces, important messages are conveyed about the value we place on creativity, hierarchy, our relationship with tradition or the future, our connection with nature, and all the other dimensions we can imagine in this context. It's not hard to imagine the difference between learning in a well-designed, carefully maintained physical space and one that is merely acceptable. Spaces teach. It's important to be aware of that, especially because sometimes they teach things we wouldn't want our students to learn. So, let's pay attention. One last aspect, and perhaps the most important one, is the role that physical movement plays in creating a framework, in setting boundaries and decontextualizing the learning experience. The fact of physically moving to a university or school helps me to set apart a portion of my experience, to shift it into a space-time that I clearly perceive as separate from the rest of my daily life. Why do I think this framing role connected to learning in dedicated spaces is perhaps the most important aspect? Because it is closely tied to the theme of interest, which not by chance etymologically means precisely to be in between, from Latin interesse. Interest in learning falls under the aspects we could define as the energetic components of motivation. What are the forces that lead a student to engage in a specific activity? In addition to perceptions of usefulness and importance of the subject, to performance-based motivations, if I pay attention, I'll get a good grade, and to the desire to experience the satisfaction that comes from developing skills, if I learn this, I'll be happy. There is, in fact, a particularly significant dimension, the so-called situational interest. I might, for example, believe that mathematics has no usefulness, think that I won't be able to get a good grade, and be convinced that I'll never gain any satisfaction from putting effort into this subject, yet I can still be captivated by a course on this topic. How come? The key is the so-called situational interest, the drive to get involved, to immerse myself in a specific activity that comes from stimulating aspects offered by the learning environment. This situational interest is determined by various interacting factors: what happens, the way we are engaged, the relational system among the individuals present, but also the physical space and its environmental characteristics matter. Situational interest can also be triggered online through learning dynamics that encourage active and collaborative participation to the point of making us somewhat forget what is happening around us and fully immerse ourselves in the educational interaction. However, we must keep in mind that the very act of having invested energy in traveling to school or university, the physical distance, which also becomes psychological, our home and family environment, and the emotional state induced by the physical presence of other people around us who show interest, are all dimensions that are difficult to recreate online with the same effectiveness. Investing in physical presence during particularly crucial learning events in the process is therefore a card we can play when we need to fully leverage situational interest. A card that is even more effective when it isn't weakened by daily routine. Let's keep that in mind. Regarding this aspect, let's not forget that physical distance is experienced differently by the participants in the learning process. Students suffer more from the absence of other students than from the lack of physical proximity to the teacher. Meanwhile, teachers report a lack of energy that stems from the complex emotional reactions triggered precisely by performing in front of a classroom. The discomfort teachers feel isn't so much due to a lack of interaction. In fact, many teachers who describe it this way don't seem particularly engaged in interaction, either in the classroom or online. So it's something different, something tied specifically to that kind of energetic feedback we receive as teachers from presenting in front of an audience, often a very large one, with whom we have an informational and power-based relationship, and I say this in an entirely benevolent way, that is completely asymmetrical. It has nothing to do with interaction or teaching effectiveness. We are dealing with the teacher's motivation. A key aspect, but one that should not be confused with the others. So, when should we invest in in-person presence? Our proposal is that the decision to hold in-person sessions should be made with full consideration of the role that well-managed and thoughtfully implemented physical presence can play as a driver of motivation for both students and teachers. The decision about which and how many learning events to conduct in person should therefore not be based solely on the individual learning event, but should be carefully calibrated in relation to the overall educational experience. High-quality in-person presence is an investment that must be managed with care, carefully evaluating its timing and setting within the entire learning journey.